Hello everyone, and welcome to a special Ubuntu On Air Q&A session. We usually do these on Tuesday, but we're making an exception today because we had a big announcement Tuesday after our regular Q&A, and that was the introduction of Snappy on the classic Ubuntu desktop in 1604. So we're going to be taking any questions you have on that today. We're on ubuntuonair.com. If you're not on that page watching this, you should go there because underneath the video there's an embedded chat window that leads you to our IRC channel, which is -ubuntu-on-air on Freenode. In that channel is where you're going to ask your questions. To do that, all you have to do is say the word question in all caps, followed by your question. Doing that makes it turn bright yellow on my screen so that I don't miss it. And we'll go through them the order they come in. We'll try and get through as many as possible. Go ahead and start asking anytime you think of something, and we'll come back to it as we get through this session. So with me today, I have Olli, I have Martin, and I have David. Say hi, guys. Olli has been in getting all of this Snappy stuff coming to the desktop, and Martin is in charge of the back-end side of things on the Snappy store. So we should be able to answer any questions that you have on either of those things. All right, so start asking your questions anytime. And to start us off, Olli is going to give kind of a summary of what it is that we're actually introducing in 1604.
Yeah, thanks, Mike, and hi, everybody. It's been, an interesting project, and really excited to see what questions there are. Thanks, Poppy. So what we're doing there is actually not only bringing Snappy to Ubuntu Desktop, but to Ubuntu, right, to classic Ubuntu, which I think is super exciting. Snappy, think of it as the evolution of our experiences that we gathered when doing the phone, where we had to think about how to deliver updates to devices as system images, how to confine applications, and so on and so forth. And Snappy is the sum of all that goodness in our learning that we're bringing to Ubuntu. And there's, I think, two incarnations of Snappy, if you will, right? So there's Snappy Ubuntu Core that we've heard of for about a year now, which is a full OS stack designed to embrace and utilize Snappy in its entirety. And then there is Snappy on classic Ubuntu. We don't have that layout, that design of the operating system, but we're still able to provide Snappy functionality, Snap functionality for our developers and users there. So what does that mean specifically for you as a user? We all are using Ubuntu LTS releases, and as being a long-term support release, they tend to get old after a while. So if you're not on the most current developer release, you'll eventually probably run into a problem of being on 1404 right now, or maybe 1604 in a year from now, and still wanting that newest, latest, greatest software package, but due to dependency problems and whatnot, it's just not available anymore. And so Snappy on Ubuntu Classic or Classic Ubuntu is actually going to address that. The way how you did it so far is you were there were people maintaining LibreOffice and other such applications in PPAs that are targeting an LTS release. But with that, you had to install a random set of PPAs. Installing a PPA usually comes with the equivalent of giving full root access to your system, which is just how apt works in that regard. And now with Snappy on Classic, you can actually replace that by accessing the same updated version of LibreOffice, not from the PPA, but from the Ubuntu software store, without having to give full access to your system. LibreOffice, and I'm just using this as an example that's relevant to desktop users, and it's a big software package. But LibreOffice, in that case, is then running on your system with enhanced security, specifically, with some AppArmor profiles that prevent file system access on certain directories. Not so sure if LibreOffice, for example, needs to have access to your SSH keys or your PGP keys. And so I think this is where I'm excited about bringing Snappy to Ubuntu. It's an additional channel to install software where our users will benefit from having newer, updated, more recent software available to them without the hassle of maintaining those PPAs. So that's my 5-minute sales pitch on Snappy. Martin, what did I miss?
Oh, I think the questions people are asking are going to fill in all the gaps. I see people came prepared.
Yep. So we'll go ahead and we'll start getting to those. Go ahead and keep asking your questions. We're going to take them in the order that they come in. All right, the first one is from D. Shimmer. He asked, does this rely entirely on a project's willingness to add snaps to their available delivery options? So do the upstreams have to provide the snaps?
No. I mean, anybody can upload a snap, right? And the content of that snap, as long as you have the correct licensing and permissions to distribute that software, anybody can upload a snap. I think it's always preferable if it's upstream. I think it's one of the interesting changes we get here, right? We often see tension between upstreams and distros, where upstream wants their latest software in the distro, and the distro is trying to provide a more stable environment for the users, and there's lots of tension here. The opportunity we have here is to let upstream take care of their users in every sense of the word. So I think while it'll probably be preferable for upstreams to upload their snaps, anybody can upload any software that they're allowed to.
All right, and on that topic, can you talk about how we're going to handle having maybe multiple packages of the same upstream?
Yeah, I mean, they should be called different things. Like we have a plan eventually to allow essentially to support proper forks, essentially, of just to map that a little bit closer to what ends up happening in open source. But for now, I think you should be mindful, right? Don't upload Apache, the package name Apache, if that trademark belongs to somebody else. So if you have your own take on Apache, call it something else. Otherwise, you kind of risk the uploading it, building a community, and then having that taken away from you, right?
All right, D. Shimmer is asking again, is there any indication whether any popular projects are investigating or already planning on providing snaps?
Besides Ubuntu?
Well, we already have a sizable developer community who have been doing this for devices, right?
Correct, and so we're in discussions with third-party developers that are important to Ubuntu, and getting their software packaged and provided as a snap through the store. And again, that has a lot of benefits for them, as they have direct, they can upload directly to the store, and the turnaround time to get an update out, for example, will be cut down quite a bit. So the answer is yes.
So the one that springs immediately to mind for me is OwnCloud. I've seen some of the OwnCloud developers talking about Snappy. They were one of the primary use cases that we're going after with Snappy, because they actually asked us to take out old packages from the archives a little while ago because they weren't able to get them updated as quickly as they wanted to.
I don't think we're here today to announce other people's announcements.
No, I'm just throwing that out as an example that's been talked about already.
Yeah.
All right, Aquarius is asking, how do I serve updates for a snap package that I've provided, and how does Snappy know that there's an update? Martin, you said you could take that one?
Yeah. Hey, Stuart. We miss you. Glad you're still hanging around. So here's the thing. The interesting thing about snaps is that they are confined, right, in a way where we couldn't do with debs. And in order to guarantee that confinement is actually properly implemented, we need to inspect that before serving it to users. So the distribution mechanism is through our store, because that gives our infrastructure an opportunity to enforce that something is properly confined. You can absolutely build your own snap and distribute your own snap, but in that case, it should be treated as an untrusted piece of software, because you could have sidestep confinement in different ways. So in general, we don't think that's the best way to distribute software, right? I think if you have a relationship between you and your users, and users are willing to fully trust you, and you want to do that, that's totally fine. There's nothing stopping you, right? It's just not the world we're trying to build, right? We're trying to make sure people can just look at random apps and install them, and make sure that that confinement is respected, right?
And I'm not sure why you would not want to use the store, because it's such a nice experience as a developer. You know, you can push a package out within seconds, really, to all of your users.
I think Stuart just likes to mess with us.
Oh, I know Stuart just likes to mess with us. Nothing changes there. All right, Broke Me Leg asks, what's the difference between snaps and clicks?
So snaps is everything we learned from building clicks. So they're completely different technologies. Like, they're complete rewrite, but with the same concepts in mind, right? The same ideas we had when building clicks are there with snaps, but as always, the second implementation is better than the first one. So so clicks, there's some uninteresting underlying details. Like, clicks are based on dbkg packages, essentially, on the deb formats, whereas snaps aren't. Snaps are essentially squashfs tarballs. And squashfs is an interesting piece of technology, because it guarantees that content is read-only, right? And so it's a very different approach of taking a package, unpacking it on disk, which is how we do debs and clicks, versus snaps, where you take a blob and you mount it. So you're not duplicating this content on disk, but more importantly, that there's some level of guarantee that app won't be modified. So I think that adds to the security story quite a bit.
Okay, next is from Michael Tunell. He's asking, what does the term frameworks refer to on this page? And he points to ubuntu.com/cloud/snappy.
So frameworks. Did you want to take this one? Okay, frameworks is a concept we used to extend Snappy Ubuntu Core, essentially. Snappy Ubuntu Core, if you've ever played with it, is really just a minimal OS, right? It gives you a kernel, a shell, and like your regular utilities, but that's it, right? There's no applications or middleware installed. And so frameworks was the one that's documented there is a concept of extending that and providing functionality, middleware, to such a system that might be used by other applications that sit on top of it. So that's what frameworks is referring to. But I think we're going to see quite a change in that concept with Snappy on 1604. I think our thoughts have evolved there in providing access to shared resources in a more mediated and secure way.
Okay, SomeKit is asking an easy one for you. When, I guess it means when is this going to be available, and can those of us who don't mind breaking our systems get it early?
You can take that one. So essentially, if you're following the development release, which will very, very soon be our stable Ubuntu 16.04 release, most of it has landed, or most of it is already available. You may have seen you have surely seen the announcement, and you have also noticed that there's no documentation for it yet. The only reason for that is because we're we're putting together a set of examples so that developers can start right away testing their apps and having a set of recipes on how to get started packaging their applications. We just want to make sure that these examples work perfectly, that they are solid, and that we set developers to a good start for essentially getting the first experience with snaps on the desktop. So even if you don't mind breaking things, I'd recommend you to wait for a couple of days until the documentation has been published. Essentially, right now you can already test it on your system. We've got some example applications, but we want to make sure, as I say, that we've got the right documentation right from the start.
All right, Broke Me Leg asks, is it possible to snap an Android game even if you have to include the kernel?
So you're confined. I think it would be a challenge to run a whole OS inside a snap. I don't want to say for sure you can't do that. I would like to see somebody try and let us know how it went. I don't think it'll be an easy path.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard just to run an Android app on Ubuntu in general.
But also, I think if it's running on Ubuntu today, Snappy is designed to have those applications also running within a Snappy context. There might be modifications needed to maybe deal with confinement or some other semantics of Snappy, but generally, if it's running there today, there shouldn't be, as far as our thinking goes, any reason why it wouldn't run in the context of Snappy.
All right, here's a good one from Stuart. Is there a certain runtime that my app is allowed to assume exists? How can I find details of this, and what are your policies around changing the runtime? For example, adding new things to it, removing things from it, versioning it, deprecating its existing parts, and so on.
So whatever we release with what's going to be called Snappy 16, which will happen in a little while, we are for the life of that release, which is going to be quite long, we aren't going to break anything. So it's going to be a very minimal base, which we will ensure that whatever app you write on the day of that release is going to continue working for however many years we support that release. So we're not going to be changing things under folks within that. And as for where you can find that list of those runtimes, that's a good documentation task for us to take on. So it is going to be pretty bare bones. That's sort of the idea.
Well, and the other main idea is of Snappy, right? Why we did this is like, we're not going to break you. You can break yourself. But with snaps being providing all their dependencies and everything that they need themselves, you're in full control of your fate there. So, trying to get out of your way there.
Michael Tunnell has a few questions in one. He says, does this mean that snaps are completely isolated? What about apps that rely on stuff like X for keyboard input? Does it also mean that snaps don't need to ask for passwords when they are installed? And are snaps only allowed to be installed from controlled sources? So taking them one at a time, what does it mean that they're completely isolated?
Confined means that when they get installed and your app looks at the system, it sees its own parallel universe of the system. So when it's looking at what installed, we essentially give it a picture specifically painted for that app. So it won't be able to write outside of its of its own space, and whatever it reads, it will only be reading something general to the system. So apps can't can't mess with each other, essentially, right? They can't write to the same paths. They can't steal data from each other. We have to go from where we are today to a future where apps are properly confined from each other. So I think this is going to be a transitional period where we won't be drawing super hard lines where your app can't access X, for example, because if we have snaps on the desktop and they can't access X, it's not going to be a very interesting ride for everybody. So what is going to change is apps will have to express beyond being complete confined what they would like. And we're going to enforce that confinement, right? So an app, in order to access X, they have to express in a feature we've called interfaces. They want to access the X interface. And we get to tweak the policy on that. So we might start off saying, well, you just have to say you want to access X, and then we'll give you access to it. And then eventually you might ask users, hey, this app that you're trying to install wants to access your screen, essentially. Would you like to allow that? The actual feature we want is using something like Mir, where having access to the display server doesn't mean being able to mess with everything. So that's the feature where will be actually to properly confine things. So confined from each other means we have all the mechanisms to isolate apps from each other. We'll just have to navigate from where we are today to that future in a smart way, right?
Right, and the second half of that was, do you need a password to install snaps, and can they only be installed from a controlled source like the Snappy store?
By default, yes. I mean, there'll be the GNOME software will be looking at just at the Ubuntu store, but you have to. I think it's a bit of a change of mindset, right? The current Ubuntu store, the Snap store, is PPAs plus kind of the archive all mixed together, right? So it's controlled source in the sense that snaps have gone through some enforcement of confinement before they reach users' desktops, but not necessarily having gone through archive admins and things like that. Does that answer the question?
I think so, yeah. If we didn't answer your question all the way, Michael, just go ahead and re-ask.
One thing I think I would add is simply that, I mean, as Martin was saying, for users, there will be a client where they will be able to install their software, and the experience will be exactly the same as if you were installing an app from the archive or from the store. I mean, and in that sense, yes, the apps come from a control source. As a developer, though, or even as a power user, you can choose to sideload apps for testing purposes, whereby you install a local .snap package, essentially, and you get it in your system, in the same way that you can do on your phone today, where you can sideload clicks.
All right, the next one's kind of a fun one. I'm not sure if any of us are going to know the answer to it, though. Brokemeleg asks, does Snappy work on Ubuntu or on Windows 10? I'm assuming he means the Ubuntu on Windows feature that's just been released.
Surely.
It will. I think there's still some. I think the Windows preview is 14.04, not 16.04, but I understand it'll likely move to 16.04. When it does, it'll get snaps.
So Snappy on Ubuntu on Windows.
The mind just got bended, right?
All right, Mighty KK says, is it possible to create a snap of a Windows application running in Wine?
Let us know. There's nothing we've built that would stop you from it. Again, it's because of the confinement policy. It's always interesting to realize how things are used to just parting all over your system, and once you confine them, you sort of realize how easy or hard some of these things are. It'll get easier. I'm sure. The right way to do it is to not spread files all over the file system. So I think lots of apps will do that properly. But it's hard to predict once you have things like wine and things that layer on top of each other, whether they'll be able to be confined properly.
So one thing that I think is particularly important and exciting about this announcement we did of bringing Snappy to Classic is, like Martin, I think it was the second time that he said, "Let us know," right? We haven't, really gone in and looked at all the apps that are there. There's a gazillion of apps in the store, right? And we're in an early phase of the project. But by bringing Snappy to Classic Ubuntu, we're enabling you as a developer to actually, start using it. We're providing you tools and documentation so that we can have that feedback from you. Obviously, there's things that we think will work, and you will find out they don't quite work as good as we think they do, and there will be feature gaps. And getting your feedback in early will help us tremendously in moving that whole system forward. So help us there. Be part of the Snappy community. Join Snappy. #Snappy, I think, on Freenode, the Snappy mailing list. Just give us that feedback.
All right, Michael Tunnell is asking, will multiple developers, like a team, be able to work on the same snap? And I gather this means maybe more on the store side of things.
Yeah, so we are building many things at the same time. One of those features is to be able to, and I think we'll have this out pretty soon, where you can basically share upload access to that snap to other developers, and just somebody will own it, and they'll just provide access to others to upload it. That's certainly something we'd like to enable as quickly as we can.
All right, the next question from McPhail was about running these on a previous question. And so we're going to skip that. McPhail, if you want to re-ask that for something more specific that didn't get answered, feel free. Stenpet asks, I'm running Snappy Core on a Raspberry Pi 2, and currently there is no X or Mir support. Will there be, or is there, some support of desktop environments on Snappy Core?
It's a good question that we're actually discussing right now with the team. So there will be Mir on Ubuntu, Snappy Ubuntu Core when we release Snappy Series 16. There will be Mir support for that. Bringing the whole desktop shell over on top of Snappy Ubuntu Core is probably not going to happen, and that has architectural levels because we want to keep Snappy Ubuntu Core thin and lean and just have a minimal OS there. But a desktop environment requires just so much more things. So we're currently thinking of ways how to bring a Unity 8 experience in a fully like Snappy OS. And so I think starting this cycle, so in a week from now, you'll probably see us think out in more public ways of how we could do this and how we would approach that. But to the core of your question, there's no graphics right now on Pi or the Dragon board, and there will be soon from here.
All right, and kind of on the other side of that, from Broke Me Leg, when will the phones be snapped?
That's sorry, very nice to do it. You need to meet yourself. Thank you. So this requires us to solve what I just described right now. It's I think you need to spend quite some cycles in understanding what's the minimal set for what we call Ubuntu Personal in terms of an OS image that is, as small as possible, as lean as possible, but at the same token, it provides all the functionality that we would need for a phone or anything with Unity 8 on top of it. So I think we'll start the work this cycle, and then we'll see how plans shape out.
All right,
Before we go
Stuart.
to the next question, Mike, just one thing that I wanted to add. You might have noticed that sometimes Olli or I are echoing. This is, as you've seen, we're sitting just right next to each other. This week we're at the US managers sprint work. We're planning quite a lot of the feature and of the architectural changes or evolution that Olli is talking about. And you'll see more and more of this planning as we go to as we release 16.04. Right now we're also sprinting to release 16.04 itself. But yeah, what I'm trying to say is that expect to see more and more of what's going to happen in the next cycles very soon.
All right, Stuart's following up on his earlier question. He says, are you suggesting that if I snap anything I didn't myself develop, that I have to invent a new name for it and not name it after the project? For example, if he makes a snap of FFmpeg, he should call it Stuart's FFmpeg. Are you planning on name spacing by uploader or something similar?
So as I said, supporting forks is in our roadmap a little bit down the line, but not just yet. So eventually you will probably be able to upload ffmpeg.aquarius, and that'll be your take on ffmpeg. But if ffmpeg upstream wants to start uploading snaps, they get to do ffmpeg. The guidance I can give you on picking a name is just pick a name that you'll be able to build a community around, right? If you're building a name that somebody else owns, then that's just a ticking time bomb, right? I think if you want to help upstream, so if you wanted to package up ffmpeg, put it out there, and then when ffmpeg upstream, wow, that's a bad example to pick to say 10 times. When they come in and want to actually take over it, if you're happy to hand it over to upstream once they're interested, then I think that's okay. Like if you go into it just trying to help upstream, package it up, show that there's some interest, that's absolutely fine. You just have to be willing to then hand that over to the actual owners. So just be conscious that you don't want to build a community around a name that you don't really have the rights to use. And if you do, just be conscious that you should do it in a way where you're just helping somebody else out.
All right. I'm going to skip some of the more technical questions. We can come back to them if we get through all of them in time. But we're going to try and keep this a little bit higher level. So if you have technical questions like McPhail has about the snappy runtime, where it runs from, go to #snappy on Freenode and ask it there. That's the best place to go for technical support, questions like that. So moving on to Omar. He asks, is there an ETA for diff-based updates between two snap versions?
Yeah, we have plans. We know how we'll do it. It's just work, which we have to get to, and we will pretty soon. We want to make this a good experience for everybody. So fast downloads is a big part of that. So we'll definitely get to it. I think in the midterm.
Okay, D. Shimmer is asking, once I upgrade to 16.04, what will it take to switch a particular package to a snappy version? And will the original still exist on the system?
Yeah, I mean, switching will require just installing the snap, and the original version, the deb will stay on the system. But the snaps, because it's basically in addition to Ubuntu, if you install Apache and you already had Apache installed and you install Apache as a snap, when you run Apache on the system, it'll the path, on your system path, it'll essentially run the snap above before it runs the dev, right? So you can keep both around, and once you install snap, the default path will go to the snap. So it should be just a matter of snap install Apache, and that's it. You're off using that snap.
I think you're muted, Mike, or at least the sound doesn't come through.
Yeah, sorry. NGAIO is asking, should a Python binding to something like libgphoto2 include what it is binding in the snap package? So if you've got a Python binding to a compiled library, should you include the compiled library also in your snap?
I was waiting for Martin or Olli to pick it up, but essentially the short answer is yes. Snap packages contain all of the bundle dependencies in the same way as click packages do on the phone.
All right. Stuart still has questions about the runtime policy. So if you make a change to the runtime, say going from 1.0 to 1.1, will you guarantee that apps that targeted 1.0 will keep working? Martin or Olli, can you answer that?
I was just reading the question. Not sure what you refer to as runtime. In a world where the snap is providing its runtime by itself.
I think he's thinking, like, for the phone, we offer a set of libraries that the apps can use that they don't ship in the click package itself. Is there an equivalent to that in the Snappy world?
No, so for core, we strip it down to the absolute bare bones, right? So there obviously is things like glib that we will provide, and we'll have to document those. But again, we won't break you, right? Whatever's on the image on the day of the release of Snappy 16, you can build a snap for that, and it'll work for the lifetime of that release. So the phone has a pretty big layer, right, to make things easier for you, right? So there's an SDK, there's all sorts of things. Ubuntu Core is the very, very bare bones. So we expect that the phone will eventually run Ubuntu Core plus a stack on top, which will be the SDK, and folks will build on top of that stack to make things easier. But in Ubuntu Core, it's very, very bare bones. We'll document what's there, and we'll guarantee we won't break, or at least not on purpose. Apps.
Okay. D. Shimmer asks, can other distributions run an implementation of the snap concept? If they did, is there a scenario that multiple distros could run the exact same snap package?
For sure. So the interesting thing of bundling all the dependencies is that the deltas between distros becomes almost zero, right? And the way this, we've been calling it a snappy dimension within Ubuntu. It brings in the whole core blob into the system. So it has all the libraries, it has everything. So you only need a really, really small set of things to have snaps actually work. So I would guess that if somebody wanted to run snaps in Fedora, and by snaps I mean the exact same snaps on Ubuntu and Fedora, that exact same binary, they could package snapd, and then snap install would install it on a Fedora system without any differences or hassle.
Or on Windows 10.
Or on Windows 10. It's a brave new world.
All right. Dev-more2 is asking, how will Snappy and Snaps work with different users on a system? Will the same snap have to be installed repeatedly, for example?
Sorry, I didn't quite get that.
So basically, if you have multiple users on a system, will you have to install the snap once for each user, or just one time and they all get to use it?
One time and they all get to use it. But each user has their own writable space.
All right. Michael Tunnell is asking, LTS versus non-LTS. How will the current 6-month release cycle be affected by Snappy? If Snappy is on 1604 LTS, then the biggest reason for users to jump is gone. I assume he means jump to the non-LTS releases of Ubuntu.
Right. So I think that's sort of Stuart's question as well that he's been trying to re-ask. So yeah, I mean, 1610 will ship with a snappy dimension, and the same snaps that work next Thursday will work on 1610 without any changes, because those snaps will bundle their dependencies, which is what usually breaks apps between releases, and they'll be running on top of on Snappy Core, which is being pulled in separately. So nothing will actually break between Ubuntu point releases, because they'll be embedding this bare bones stable environment, and you'll be bundling all your dependencies with it and moving forward as is convenient for you. So I think that's really Stuart's question as well.
All right.
Whether it's worth it or not moving between Ubuntu releases, I mean, I don't know. That really is up to. There's other interesting things in a release, right? Like Unity, and there's other. I think you won't be moving releases between releases just to get the latest version of apps, and I think that's actually the right thing. I think people don't really want to move between releases just to get updated apps, but I think there'll be other reasons to move between releases that might be appealing.
All right. Stuart is asking what reserved means in an interface definition, and he gives the documentation on.
Yeah. Reserved means it breaks confinement one way or another, or at least strict confinement. So developers shouldn't expect to use that freely, although, as I said in the beginning, it's a new world and we have to transition. So there might be some interfaces which are reserved, which we allowed through automatically today, but we have a record of which apps are using which reserved interfaces. Some we might flag automatically and ends up on a queue that a human looks at and makes a decision. But reserved essentially means it breaks a little bit out of confinement one way or another.
All right. Almejo is asking, I'm developing a browser plugin for Firefox. The plugin starts another local app of mine. Is it possible to package these two apps in a snap? He says, I think the problem is the plugin. So maybe if you can answer a little bit more broadly how plugins will work, if they'll work.
I don't think plugins are the right things to start up snapping because of confinement, right? Plugins by definition don't want to be confined, right? They want to be part of something else and access something else and extend something else. So we've been thinking quite a bit about plugins and language packs and all sorts of extensions to existing apps, and we'll figure this out. But I don't think that's the right place to start at the moment.
All right. NGAIO is asking, for an application like a photo importer, where you want the user to be able to save photos pretty much wherever they have write access to the file system, how will the confinement policy affect that?
So a lot of these things we solve for the phone. So what we'll slowly bring in are what we call trusted helpers, where the app doesn't have free access to the file system, but it pops up a system trusted mechanism for the user to explicitly say, yes, you can write or read from this location, right? And it'll just be a file dialog, right? So all of this is lots of implementation, but it'll just be save it'll show you your home directory, and you'll save wherever you want. And all of that will be fine, right? The difference is that the app won't be able to read or write from places on your file system without you having explicitly decided to do so. And again, right, a lot of this we solved on the phone, so we're reusing all those concepts, in some cases even code. But the trusted helpers from the phone to the desktop will take a little bit of time as we bring them in.
All right. Stuart has another question. He says, if I have 5 different versions of Inkscape as snaps, and then I type Inkscape in a terminal, which one runs? Is there some sort of Debian-ish alternatives approach?
So as I said, we won't have alternatives or forks support in the short term. So that means they will actually be different apps. It'll be Inkscape Aquarius, Inkscape DPM, or Inkscape, and you'll actually have to run different commands. You'll either run Inkscape, which will match to that package.
Okay, D. Shimmer is asking, do all of the answers that we've been giving so far also apply to Ubuntu Server in 1604?
They do.
Yes. So,
except perhaps maybe the GUI stuff, right?
Right. I was just about to say. But so Snappy on classic Ubuntu, and it's not just desktop, Stuart. It's Ubuntu, right? That Debian-based Ubuntu we all love and use right now. That everything applies there, with the caveat of some graphics or GUI related questions or answers we were giving.
All right, and I don't see any new questions. I'm gonna go back and try and capture one that Stuart was asking. So it seems what Stuart really wants to know is if he targets his snap package for 1604, does he know if that is going to continue to run when the user's on 1610 or 1704? So will that 1604 environment still be the same on newer releases of Ubuntu itself?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Quick and crisp. Because the way how it works is, right, so in Snappy on classic Ubuntu is pulling in Ubuntu core, and that is tied to the 16 release, and so that means that will be stable throughout the lifetime of the Series 16 Ubuntu core release. So it doesn't matter like if your software around you is 1604 or 1610. What really matters, what's your entry point is Snappy, or the Snappy package, and then whatever magic it does underneath, which is pulling in Ubuntu core.
All right. Well, those were all of the questions that we've had. Do you guys have any anything you want to talk about that maybe didn't get asked, or any closing thoughts that you want to leave people with before we wrap up?
I would talk perhaps a bit of the developer experience, which I think we haven't covered that much. So one of the important parts for users will be that, as we've said, they will have the same experience as they had for installing applications on previous versions of Ubuntu. They will just get the benefits of, not just, but they will get the added benefits of more frequent updates and decoupling the app update cycle from the actual release cycle. For developers, we've put together a set of tools and documentation to make the experience of creating a snap much more pleasant. Essentially, this boils down to a tool, Snapcraft, that takes care of doing all of the work for you. Essentially, all of what Snapcraft requires is essentially the sources and then a YAML file called snapcraft.yaml with a specific syntax where you describe how your package is crafted. It's put together essentially. You can then call Snapcraft in different stages, or you can just tell Snapcraft to do everything, where everything means fetching the required dependencies, being Debian packages, being Git sources, being BCR sources, then staging all together, assembling the snap, building the snap, and then you end up with the .snap file, which you can either sideload for installing and testing locally, or then ultimately you can then publish to the store. And when I say publish to the store, then that will mean also that you can publish your application for different architectures as well. And to wrap that up, just to mention that Launchpad also supports building snaps for you. So once you've tested that your application builds locally, or your snapped application builds locally, what you can do is to get Launchpad to use a branch, which might be a PZR branch or a branch imported from GitHub, to build those snaps in different architectures for you and make them available to users. All right, I think Olli wanted to take another question.
Yeah, Erica J asked an interesting question, whether we're going to dog food it and whether Snappy will be a snap itself, whether this because of app isolation or whatever will not be possible. Right, in Snappy Ubuntu Core, which I refer to as a OS that's architected and laid out to be like an entire snap system, as opposed to how the snowflake that we see in classic Ubuntu today. Everything, and it's kind of cool, is a snap, right? So you have this separation of the OS snap. There's a kernel snap, and so on and so forth. So Snappy, like the tooling command line client, will be part of the OS snap. So yes, we're definitely dogfooding that right there. And learning a lot by doing so, actually. It's been an interesting experience.
All right, there's a few questions that I think we can bundle all together to wrap things up, and that's about the UI toolkit. So Michael Tennell asked if you depended on GTK 3.18, and then a newer version of Ubuntu has GTK 3.20, how would the snap handle this? And then NGAIO is also asking for Qt-based apps. Should the snap include its own version of Qt also?
Yeah, I mean, remember that what you're seeing from a snap on Classic isn't the desktop. You're seeing Ubuntu Core. That's the file system you're seeing. So you don't have Qt and GTK, even though they're installed on the desktop. You don't, right? So you have to bundle those libraries with your snap, because otherwise they're not available, right? You don't get to access things outside of Ubuntu Core, right? So confinement goes a few ways. So there's some exceptions to that, like X being able to use the X socket and things like that. But in general, it's your library. So you pick the version of Qt that you want and bundle that with your snap, and that'll work forever. If you want to upgrade Qt to whatever version, even your crazy patch version, go ahead. That's absolutely fine. There's the question that comes up over and over again where, well, but then security updates and things like that, which is an absolutely fair question and concern. And I mean, obviously there's trade-offs between all of the approaches. We have some pretty good ideas there. The way if you use the standard tooling like Snapcraft will pull in Qt and all the libraries from the archive, and we'll record what versions of the libraries are there, and that will be parsable essentially. So we will still be able to tell developers, hey, you've bundled this specific library as part of your snap, and there's a pretty critical security vulnerability. We suggest you update. So we'll still be able to poke developers about security updates, and if there's critical security updates, we could ask developers to pull the apps. We could warn users. There's plenty of things we can do, and we'll figure out what the best thing to do is, right? But the reality is, it's upstreams users, right? So while there might be a vulnerability in a specific library, it might not affect your app because your app doesn't use that part and things like that. So there's definitely a trade-off.
All right, so we've got time for one last question, and this is a good one to end on. It's from D. Shimmer. He's asking, on upgrading to 1604, I assume, will I have to install Snappy, or can I just start snap installing? And will available snap packages be easily discoverable?
It will be installed by default, and you will be able to use it right from the start. We'll have discovery will happen through the command line or through Ubuntu software, the graphical client to the store. So it's right there at the tip of your finger or your mouse, whatever.
All right. Well, apologies if we didn't get to your questions. You can always, like we said earlier, go to #snappy on Freenode IRC. You can ask us anytime there. There's a Snappy mailing list. There's also Ask Ubuntu, where we've got some tags specifically for these kinds of questions. The Ubuntu community team will be back next week on Tuesday to do another Q&A, so you can bring questions then also. This video is available to rewatch, so if you want to go back and get any questions you may have missed, it's all on youtube.com/UbuntuOnAir. I want to thank Olli and Martin and David for coming on. Oh, and David reminds me we're also going to be doing a Snappy clinic where we're going to be walking you through getting set up, creating your own snaps. David, can you say when that is?
Sure. So that's going to be right after release on Tuesday, the 26th of April, where people will have had time to upgrade their systems or install their systems new with 16.04. We'll be running this Snappy clinic here on this channel on Ubuntu On Air, Tuesday, the 26th of April at 1500 UTC, exactly the same time as this Q&A, and you'll be able to ask questions specifically about Snappy and get help in packaging your apps. We'll have some of the Snappy developers to essentially help you with any questions or guiding you through creating your first snap.
All right. Well, we hope all of you are just as excited about the snappy future of Ubuntu as we are. And again, please send us any feedback you have as you start trying out these tools. We will make it better with your input and testing and feedback. Again, thank you, Martin and Olli and David, and thank you, everybody on IRC, for all of your questions. We will talk to all of you later.
Thank you, guys.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.